Chapter 9, A Man Who Lives in Silence. It was 5:27 a.m. when Jiho opened his eyes. There was no alarm clock. He didn't need one. When someone lives for years following the same schedule, the body itself becomes a clock. The white ceiling above him was extremely familiar. A small stain near the right corner and a thin crack barely visible unless someone looked carefully. Jiho knew its exact place, because he had woken up here every day for the past 2 years. He slowly sat on the edge of the bed. The room was simple, almost empty. One bed, an old wooden wardrobe, a small desk with a yellow lamp, and an open book that had not been closed since last night. There were no photos, no memories. Nothing that suggested someone truly lived here except him. He stood up, opened the window. Cold morning air entered the room. At this hour the city had not fully awakened yet, but Seoul never truly sleeps, so there was always light, always the distant sound of cars. He looked at the far buildings for a moment, then closed the window. A new day, the apartment. The apartment where Jiho lived was on the 7th floor of a relatively old building in a quiet neighborhood. Not luxurious, but not small either. 2 large bedrooms, a spacious living room, a kitchen far larger than one person needed. People who saw it for the first time usually asked, "Why does one person live here?" The answer was simple. He didn't buy the apartment. It belonged to his family. His father had purchased it 10 years earlier as a real estate investment, then almost forgot it existed. When Jiho left the family home after the major conflict, he took almost nothing with him. No money, no cars, no credit cards, only one thing remained with him, the key to this apartment. And because the legal ownership had been in his name for years, his father could not take it back. It was the last thing left from a life he no longer wanted. The kitchen. Jiho entered the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. The contents were always the same. Milk, eggs, some vegetables, water, nothing extra, nothing luxurious. He took the milk carton and poured a glass. He drank it standing. Slowly. He wasn't someone who liked breakfast, but the body needed something before work. After that, he wore his usual black jacket, picked up his bag, and left. The first job, at 6:10 a.m. He was already riding his bicycle through the streets. The delivery company he worked for was small, located behind a crowded old market. The metal sign above the door had faded, but the business had never stopped working for 20 years. He entered. The first voice he heard was extremely familiar. "Oh, look who's here, the man who never arrives late." Jiho sighed internally. That voice. Kim Dong-wook. Kim Dong-wook was the only coworker who spoke to Jiho, not a friend, not someone close, but someone who never stopped talking. Dong-wook was 27, slightly tall. His brown hair was poorly dyed, and his eyes always shone with strange enthusiasm. If people had colors, Dong-wook would be loud orange. Energy, movement, noise, the exact opposite of Jiho. He approached carrying a breakfast bag. "Do you know what time it is now?" Jiho didn't answer. Dong-wook continued. "Of course you do, you always know the time. Do you have a clock in your brain or something?" He placed the bag on the table, then said while opening the food, "I bought extra kimbap. Don't look at me like that. I know you'll say no, but I already bought it." Jiho looked at him for a moment, then took one piece, only to end the conversation. Dong-wook smiled triumphantly. "Ha, I knew it! A relationship that isn't one." The truth was that Dong-wook wasn't close to Jiho, but he was the only one who tried, since the first day of work. He noticed this man never talked to anyone, never laughed, never complained, and never got angry. So he decided to talk to him every day. Even if Jiho never replied, he didn't know Jiho's story or his past. He only saw a silent coworker and believed silence should be broken. As for Jiho, he considered Dong-wook nothing more than daily noise, like street sounds, deliveries. By 7 a.m. work had begun. Orders, hospitals, stores, offices. Jiho was the fastest among them. Not because he tried to be, but because he worked precisely. Every movement calculated, every road memorized in his mind. He rode through the city like someone who had known it since childhood, but the truth was he hadn't. In his previous life, he had never even ridden a bicycle. University. At 12:30 p.m., his first shift ended. He removed the delivery jacket, put on a simple gray coat, then headed somewhere else. Seoul National University. Jiho was a student there. Business administration. 3rd year, the irony was obvious. The son of a man who built a financial empire was now studying how companies were built, but without any money, without any support. He paid his tuition himself, worked in the morning, studied in the afternoon, worked again at night. Not only because he had to, but because he wanted to prove one thing, that he was not just a failed heir. The calf. At 7:30 p.m. Jiho returned to another place. A quiet place. Small, warm, a calf in a side street away from the crowds. The sign above the door was written in simple letters, Lumen. This calf belonged to him, not because his father bought it, but because he bought it himself. 2 years earlier, when he left the family home, he had only a small amount of money. Money he gained from selling personal belongings, a watch, a computer, and a few small shares that had been in his name. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy an old calf whose owner wanted to close it. The place had been nearly abandoned. Old furniture, few customers. But Jiho didn't care about profit. He only wanted one thing, a place he owned himself. A place not built by his father's money. Night. At this hour of the night, Jiho usually sat behind the table near the window, managing accounts, reviewing bills, or reading. The calf wasn't crowded, only a few customers, silence, and warm yellow light. This place was the closest thing to peace in his life. Family. Han Jiho had not spoken to his family for 2 years. His father, Han Sungmin, a harsh businessman, cold like steel. If he were a color, he would be metallic gray. He believed in only one thing: success, money, power. His mother, Lee Sayan, a very quiet woman, she loved art and music. Her color would have been pale blue. She had always tried to mediate between father and son. But in the end, quietness does not always defeat rigidity. Jiho had no siblings. He was the only son, the only heir, and now none of that mattered. Returning home. At 11:50 p.m. Jiho returned to his apartment. The city was calmer. He opened the door, entered. Silence welcomed him. He placed his keys on the table, then sat on the large sofa in the living room. The wide room felt even bigger when someone was alone. He closed his eyes for a moment, but his mind was not here. For some reason, he remembered something small. A child. Pink dress and her childish voice saying, "Jiho." He opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling, then sighed quietly. He said to himself in a low voice, "Strange." He didn't know why he remembered that, but the truth was simple. In his daily life, no one called his name that way, and no one smiled at him with that kind of smile. Finally he stood, turned off the lights. Outside, the city was still awake. But inside, the large apartment silence returned to fill everything. A silence Han Jiho had grown used to. But this silence was no longer as empty as it had been just 1 day ago.